Have you ever tried to build a business between flare-ups? To climb the career ladder while your body is begging you to lie down? What does success look like when your ambition has to coexist with chronic illness? Welcome to Chronic Boss Unfiltered, the podcast where ambition meets women's health. I'm Lilly Stairs, and I've built 2 businesses while managing 3 autoimmune conditions. Each week, I sit down with powerhouse women, entrepreneurs, leaders, and changemakers who are building the career of their dreams while navigating chronic conditions. Together, we'll help you dream big while prioritizing your health. No filters, no fluff, just raw stories from the hospital bed to the boardroom. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to Chronic Boss Unfiltered. I'm Lilly Stairs, your host, and today I am joined by Dr. Kara Wada. She is a quadruple board-certified physician, autoimmune patient, and founder of the Immune Confident Institute. Kara is on a mission to help people living with chronic illness and autoimmune conditions reclaim their energy and rewrite their stories. She's known for her perfect storm model of chronic illness and 4R framework, and we're going to dig into all of that today. And we're also going to talk about how Kara made the bold leap to start her own practice, building a career that truly aligns with her values and her health. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention that Kara is a founding member of our Chronic Boss Collective and someone that I deeply admire. Kara, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me here. And I look forward to this conversation because every time we chat, I feel like it moves the dial forward even further.
So beautifully said. I'm excited to jump in. I learned so much from you, and you've evolved and grown so much in the past year. You and your brand and your practice have just taken off. So this is such an amazing opportunity for our listeners to hear from someone who really embodies what it means to be a chronic boss. So let's jump in. You went on this journey from physician to patient. I want to talk a little bit about this. You were diagnosed with Sjogren's, and it sounds like that was a real turning point for you. So what was the experience like as a doctor and now as a patient?
I think the best analogy is it has been like peeling the layers of an onion and has included a lot of the tears and, associated with that too. So, really my diagnosis came in the spring of 2019. I was fresh off of maternity leave after having my second child. And it was a little bit of a rough stretch. She actually, within about 2 weeks of my diagnosis, she had her first and thankfully only anaphylactic reaction to eggs. So she was diagnosed with a food allergy, which our family had no history of. And I had recently been to the dentist for that, that first visit postpartum, like after, putting things off, because that's what moms do, especially doctor moms. Your health gets put on the back burner. And the dental hygienist had said, like, goodness, Kara, your mouth looks really dry. Is there anything, are you on any medications? Is there anything going on that may be contributing to that? And really, it was that comment that, along with kind of my medical knowledge and knowledge of all the stuff I had been dealing with symptom-wise up to that point, was like, oh, 4-letter word. I think this is something more serious. And so to give a little more context, dating back to even my residency training, several, 5+ years before, there came a point where I wasn't able to wear contacts anymore. My eyes were really dry. It wasn't comfortable. Around the time I had my oldest, she's about 3 years older than the middle, I stopped wearing mascara because I realized when I put on mascara, which was my favorite makeup product, I would look like a raccoon by like an hour and a half into the day because I was touching my eyes in hindsight because they were so dry. It was a bummer. And I had some back stiffness that weirdly always got better when I was pregnant. I had more energy when I was pregnant outside of that early first trimester stuff. And the immunologist in me knew that that wasn't normal. And also saw that all my girlfriends were like, oh, this is terrible. I feel so, so gross. And what I knew about the science of inflammatory conditions in general, autoimmune conditions, asthma, is that about 1/3 of patients with those conditions will feel remarkably better when they're pregnant. And so it was kind of putting all these pieces together that I recognized, oh goodness, could this be Sjogren's? Because what we're tested on through our training about Sjogren's really centers around dryness, and dryness being those key defining features of the disease. And so I made an appointment with my primary care doctor, psyched myself up because I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to be that patient that's asking for the labs and knows what she wants. And then I was like, but I actually know my primary care. We've taught together. And hopefully she'll value my opinion as a peer and like all this mind drama. Right? So I show up to the visit and explain my worries, that I've been utterly exhausted. My body hurts all over and that my mouth is really dry. I've had dry eyes and I'm worried about Sjogren's. Being a caring physician and also colleague and I think wanting to see the glass half full, her response was, I bet this is just being a tired mom. We can, I guess we can do the labs. That's fine. But, I'm sure you're fine. It'll be okay. Like try to get some more sleep. And sure enough, the labs were pretty blaringly abnormal. And that then set on, this ongoing story of seeing my rheumatologist friend and colleague who was like, oh, this will probably be no big deal. Sjogren's, if you have to have an autoimmune condition, it's the best one to have. We do have to put you on some treatment. And when I look back to that set of circumstances, more than 5 years ago now, my practice has evolved since this time. I became very vocal primarily about, goodness, I have ultimate privilege in my position. And I'm sure we'll talk more about this. But as I look back and as I now care for a lot of patients with Sjogren's and related conditions, I shudder to think about where I would be if my labs had not been abnormal. Because I really, truly believe that I probably would still be undiagnosed. I would be untreated. And I don't know if I would be practicing medicine with where things were going symptom-wise. And that's the position many of my patients are in, because the reality is, and this is what is often missed through medical education, is that 30 to 40% of patients with Sjogren's have normal blood work.
Yep. And we hear this in autoimmune. This happens with many other autoimmune conditions too. And then patients that it results in them being gaslit, they don't have answers. And we hear this frequently in the autoimmune space, patients saying, I was so relieved to have when they finally get a diagnosis, that people didn't think they were crazy anymore, right?
No, I can relate to that. Certainly no one wants to have a diagnosis, right? But if you're already experiencing those symptoms and feel like utter crap, to at least have a name, a community, a path forward, an idea of, what things might look like or you need to watch out for. Like for instance, with Sjogren's, there is an increased risk of lymphoma. So making that diagnosis is actually pretty important, not only for getting access to treatment, which is increasingly available, but also having a lower threshold to check out things that may, you might otherwise be a little like, oh, we can just wait and see. If you have an increased baseline level or risk of a particular condition, you're going to be more aggressive about checking out lumps and bumps and other health changes.
Yeah, no, it's such a good point. And you talking through your whole story, there are so many different themes that I heard come up, one of which is something that we talk about a lot in Chronic Boss and on this podcast around women's health, and so much that we don't understand. I keep hearing these, oh, well, we kind of know that sometimes people with autoimmune diseases, when they're pregnant, they might go into remission and then postpartum they flare. We don't really know why. It's like there's so many questions that we have that we don't have answers to, right? And same with like the blood work. We know that there will oftentimes people do have autoimmune diseases, but it doesn't always show up in the blood work. We don't know why. We just don't have these answers. And 80% of people living with autoimmune diseases are women. It is a woman's health issue. And it's just frustrating to hear. I hear these common themes and stories all the time, and it makes me really angry.
Me too. And it in part fuels, especially those days that are like the harder days, right? Just to keep persisting, because there's so much work to be done. And also, off the bat, just talking about seeing how far, we've come in this short period of time, personally, how much things have changed in the last 3 years, it's night and day. And so I sometimes have trouble dreaming about what would I like things to look like 3 years from now, kind of
Yeah.
following that trajectory, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm.
So you've talked previously about this Sjogren's diagnosis and how it's made you a better doctor. Can you tell me a little bit more about what that means? How did that change your lens and your bedside manner and care philosophy?
Well, at the very surface level, I know a whole lot more about Sjogren's disease now than I ever did, coming out of training, which is interesting because it makes sense, right? If you have the disease, you then can associate that lived experience. But I have learned so much about the condition from fellow patients, so much more than those few hours of lectures I received or, the sporadic patient I would have seen on a rheumatology rotation or in other rotations. So there's that medical kind of knowledge aspect that, certainly has leveled up considerably. The other piece of it is really going back to that, like understanding very intimately what those symptoms can feel like, especially when things are flared up. I mean, there was a significant period of time in 2019. I actually ended up cutting down to being half-time clinician in order to focus on my health and recovery. Part of that, I had a pretty significant flare. It was a little bit self-induced, which we may or may not talk about later, but I had a liver injury from taking a supplement. And so between that and Sjogren's itself, I cut way back on clinic and really tried to focus in on my health and healing and resting. And that, I think, was really a big turning point. And then part of it too has been learning how much we don't know. It came out of training, and I think I've always been a pretty humble physician, especially within the field of allergy immunology. The field is relatively young, been around for about a little over 100 years. And frankly, the speed at which things are changing from a research standpoint, drinking water from the fire hose is an analogy that probably doesn't even do it justice. It's a little bit more like a tsunami, that there is a ton of advancement, and really it's hard to stay on top of all of it. And I think we need to have a greater appreciation for knowing what we don't know. I think it's also helped me to slow down. I've never been a clinician that was built for speed. I had joked as I was finishing training, I would have totally floundered in some of the private practice allergy positions that some of my colleagues are working in, where they're seeing 20 plus patients in a day. In part because I liked hearing stories. I liked that human connection, but increasingly over time, word got out on the street that I liked to take care of patients that didn't quite read the textbook. And unfortunately, it's that change in focus of my practice that led toward the end of my academic career, but also created an immense opportunity. And, how I explain our understanding of how we go on to develop immune systems that are dysregulated or malfunctioning is we have barriers in our body, our skin, our respiratory tract, our gut, women, our genital urinary tract too. And those barriers are covered with microbes, microbiome. And many of these exposures that we are subject to are chipping away at our armor over the course of our life. And there are a lot of things about our modern way of living that aren't so great at helping build in resiliency for those barriers too. And so when you end up with a leakier or more permeable barrier, you also see changes in the microbiome. And we think that this is a bit of like a snowball effect, that you're a chicken and the egg, whatever analogy that you want to think about, but they're probably feeding one another. And when that happens, at that point, your barrier is leaky, your microbiome looks a little different. The immune system cells and your nerves, which are both a part of our body's ability to determine if we're safe or not safe in our environment, they're being asked to see more of the environment, scan it for problems. They're seeing different things that we weren't accustomed to seeing. So different products from the different microbes that aren't as helpful. They're seeing microplastics and other things in our diet that aren't quite food. And we think it's that perfect storm of events that really then shifts things towards allergy or towards autoimmune conditions. It's not just focused so one would think, okay, goodness, if that increased permeability is in the gut, that may only result in inflammatory bowel disease. But the reality is that there's crosstalk across our whole system. So there are some examples of, things that may start in the gut, but show up as autoimmune issues in the nervous system, or problems in the skin. Eczema, for instance, we know is increased risk of food allergy. So that is a little bit more about that perfect storm.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And one of the best ways actually that I've heard that explained and understanding what goes into autoimmune conditions and allergies developing. So thank you for that walkthrough. I want to hear more about your 4 R's because we've alluded to them, and this is part of your solutions framework for patients that you're seeing. So tell me a little bit about that.
So 4 R's, we have recognize. So the first and foremost thing, you need to just take stock of where things are. What are the symptoms I'm dealing with? What do I think some of those triggers might be? And also recognizing that you are worthy of care and love and attention, really thinking about it from that whole entity. The second R is reclaim. So kind of stepping into that, okay, I'm going to start taking back some of those elements that have slipped away or frankly been ripped out of our hands. When we go and navigate the healthcare system, gosh, there's nothing sometimes that can be more demoralizing than trying to navigate, at least in the US, our healthcare system. So, reclaiming our agency, realizing that we can be back in the driver's seat of our health and of our lives. It's a lot of that mental mindset framework, that needs to happen. And then the reality is that we have to be a little bit rebellious. So rebel, tomato, that is really required to, one, navigate healthcare, but two, for many of my patients that are stuck in a loop of hypervigilance, they need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, making appointments, trying to reintroduce foods. If you've whittled down your foods to 4 safe foods, that's not sustainable long-term. So we're going to have to, part of my role is to help encourage and help people feel as safe as they can with pushing our comfort zone a little bit. It also means asking for what we need. It means establishing boundaries and holding to them in our work, right? And then that allows us to hit number 4, which is to rise, to really step into that immune confidence, to realize that, gosh, no matter what, I've survived my toughest days. I'm going to get through this day too, that even if I flare or when I flare, I have my toolbox. I know what I'm going to do. I know who I can call, who's on my team to help support me, knowing that I can help support me too. And that's really where people begin to shine. And it's been amazing to see some of the transformation. Some of my patients that started with me 6 months ago who really were eating 4 or 5 foods. And now Jill, who's allowed me to use her name, she's up to over a dozen foods. She's doing some more trips outside the house where she was pretty much in her condo most of the time. I think the most dramatic and encouraging thing is just seeing the change in her facial expressions from thinking back to the first time we met, fear, feeling really down. And, even hearing a message from her this week that she had a little bit of a reaction to something she tried, but she's bouncing back and, okay, we're going to try, move on to the next thing. We got this. It's been super rewarding.
That's amazing. And look at the impact you're making because you made the decision. I couldn't help but think when you were going through the 4 R's, you made the decision to rebel against this. What was commonplace? What is tradition? What physicians typically do? And you said, you know what? No, I'm going to write my own story and I'm going to help my patients write their own story too. And that's really, really beautiful.
There's a little bit of me that is stuck in that teenage, angsty, pop punk, middle finger energy that I have to tap into from time to time. And I think a bit of that is I was very much the straight A people pleaser. So I didn't really do much rebelling like the teens. And so I'm like, well, now it's coming out in my 40s. Better late
This
than
is
never.
the rebellion era. It's perfect. And you
Yes.
know what it is? I think that that's something that patients are probably drawn to you for, because so much of what we see in conventional medicine is just going by the book. And so you throwing the book out the window and saying, we're going to make this custom and we're going to pull in all of these different methodologies to make something that's individualized to you, that's powerful and that's impactful. And that's what patients need. So hats off to you for doing that. It's exciting to hear the progress that you've made and the patients' lives that you've changed. So now we've heard a little bit about your practice. We've heard about how you support patients. And I think there's been some great tips in here too for our listeners that are living with chronic conditions on how they can start to think about really claiming ownership of their health. I want to, because at Chronic Boss, we talk about in the same breath health and business. I want to talk a little bit about building this business and the challenges that come with building a business. Before we hit record, you got on the call and you said, I said, how are you? And you said, I'm not doing a very good job with my boundaries right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I really appreciated, first of all, I want to say that I appreciated that honesty and transparency, because as business owners and entrepreneurs and people who are sharing our stories on social media, I often feel a pressure to show up and say, oh, I'm holding my boundaries and I'm doing this and I'm time blocking and I'm doing everything right. But the reality is there are some days I don't do any of those things right. I try to coach people and help them to do it. But sometimes, like, patients or health advocates are sometimes the worst patients. Sometimes I feel like I'm
Mhm.
the worst entrepreneur. But anyway, so tell me, like, what's going on with your boundaries? What happened? What do you typically try to
Yeah.
do? And
So,
what happened this week?
I'm going to take you back. So I resigned I put in my notice in October. I had my last day end of January. And from January to March, it was pretty great because I wasn't seeing patients. I was just building, behind the scenes, and it was a lot of work, but I was working out regularly and I was cooking and meal planning and spending time with my kids. And it was pretty great. And then I got back from spring break. I kind of soft opened a little bit for a few patients in March that needed to kind of get in from the time that I had left OSU that knew me and were kind of following with me. And that was fine. I guess testament to my team and our grassroots marketing we opened the clinic with twice as many members, like new members, as what we had set as a goal.
Wow.
It's incredible. And I think is, a bit of a proof of concept that there is a need for what we have to offer. We had systems in place, but we were still to a point like building as we were going, right? I had a brand new virtual medical assistant who I realized pretty soon, early on, I was going to need that help administratively, adding folks to the team, figuring out some standard operating procedures, like really realizing, oh goodness, we need more structure than what we figured we would need right off the bat. And so it was pretty soon that I was drinking water from the fire hose in that sense. I also was having to learn how to do some of the administrative tasks that, frankly, in a big health system, I never had to do. Like today, I was struggling to figure out why I couldn't get a prior authorization to go through cover my meds before we got on. And so, there still are some of those logistical challenges. And, it's humbling. We've had a lot of requests. I'm licensed in 16 states, and there are another handful of states that I get a lot of interest from and like to expand to those states. And also, I'm trying to think about, and in this place where clinically we're feeling the crunch on things, I've hired a part-time nurse practitioner that I've worked with in the past, Jennifer Henning, who's phenomenal, and she's working part-time, but we're really trying to think about how we can scale, because the reality is that I can't see everyone that wants to come. And I need additional clinicians to help me on this journey. And I've known that that's going to be the case all along. And also that's hard, right? Like how we have it set up currently, we're an out of network practice, a cash pay practice. And There's, some discussion about how and why, but how things are logistically set up now is that folks pay when they schedule. The advantage to that is I can't remember the last time I had someone not show up to their appointment. So I don't have to, I obviously am not double booking. And that's one of the reasons why a lot of insurance-based practices will double book, because there are a good percentage of folks who just won't show up to their appointment. If someone's paying and then they're having to wait a long time to see me, right, that doesn't feel great. And so I have not been great about work to time block my schedule to make time for, kind of that CEO time to think about how we're going to scale, time set up to think about marketing and content production for the YouTube channel and some other things that are helpful for the practice. And those have been chipped away because I've added in patient slots. And so we're working on, it's the messy middle. We're
It's
working on it.
messy middle, and because you don't want to say no, right? You don't want to say
Yeah.
no to people, but it's also really hard to delegate or to hand things over and give something to somebody else. This is something I personally struggle with. I had such a hard time letting go, and I still do in some cases in my businesses until I can
Mhm.
trust someone, and finding somebody that you really trust. It's not easy. And especially this is something that this is people's health, right? That's in your hands. And you want to make sure that anyone who is coming into your practice is getting a top-notch experience and the experience that you want for them. You're a unicorn in what you've designed. And so then training other people in that, it's a challenge. And so you are in it. And so
Mhm.
as you're going through, you're in this now, I guess, what would be your advice to people who are just getting, they want to start a business, maybe they want to start their own practice. So I want to hear your advice there. Then I'm going to ask you, even though you're in it right now, what advice you would give to people who are in the messy middle.
Yeah. So for those that are thinking about it, allow yourself, like give yourself an hour, 90 minutes and just dream. Let go of any, as best you can, any preconceived notions, and just think about one, who are your favorite people to take care of? Clients, patients, whatever term is used in your industry. And oftentimes, as the case with my practice, that ideal patient stems from my own experiences as a patient. Not 100%, because I'm not only caring for physicians with this, right? But like there is that overlap. And allow yourself to think about how you could rewrite the book. Alongside that, though, too, I would say that we need to think about what others have done successfully, because oftentimes we do want to rewrite the book, but there is a reason why certain models are successful. And so I think we can take cues from those. For instance, I read one of the most recent books I read was Unreasonable Hospitality. It's a book that is written by Will Godara. I might not be saying his name right. He was owner of 11 Madison Park, which was named as the top restaurant in the world about 10 years ago. And so the book really centers around how they built this incredible restaurant that was centered around relationships and human connection. And that was their secret sauce. And so here I am reading this book about the restaurant industry. I am not in the restaurant industry, but there was so much there to pull from that I want to lead with that love and that care and that relationship with patients, to look creatively outside of your industry for ideas and ways that things have worked, I think is another really cool. And that's what the Chronic Boss is great with. We're a collection of amazing humans with very diverse backgrounds and interests, across many different industries. For those in the messy middle, I think one of the things that has really been critical is community support. So I am a part of not only the Chronic Boss Collective, but another similar professional organization that is a little more physician centric. Everyone in the group is a clinician, although not everyone is there to build their clinical practice. There are some that are doing some non-medical things, but I also, having mentorship from folks who are a step or two ahead in their business pursuits can be incredibly valuable. And so, two of my mentors, one, she has her career has been in the C-suite. She has a business background, but goodness, she sure helps me point out things that are like, oh, that's just, a goofy medicine, like, preconceived notion, like let go of that. That would never happen in the C-suite. And she says it like it is. And then a physician leader who frankly, she doesn't practice anymore. She's made a huge name for herself in real estate and built several multi-million-dollar companies surrounding that. And practicing medicine is not the same as investing in real estate at all, but the struggles that, she has had as a mom with similar age kids, building and scaling companies to that next level, it's really helpful when you're in it to see folks that are on the other side. And that frankly has really helped this last few weeks. And I'm sure it will as, looking out at my schedule, I think, out till like, Thanksgiving time, things are going to be a little rocky, but I also know that I'm putting things in place. So we had some childcare help that we parted ways with about 4 weeks ago. We decided to reevaluate things. And so we're switching things in that regard. So I'm going to have some more support and help at home through this. So that's kind of been one benchmark that I'm like, okay, we're going to get to when Jessica starts. And then that will be like, won't have to think about, packing lunches and, a few of those things that are like, just add to the layers. And then making some adjustments to my clinic template. I started reaching out to other clinicians that may be interested in joining us and looking at what that might be from, frankly, the logistics of like hiring people is expensive. And, how do you create a viable business, plan from that? Yeah. Sorry, I kind of went down the rabbit hole there, but that's what I'm in.
No, it's great. And you had such sound advice for people both who are thinking about getting started and those who are in it and in the messy middle. I love the advice around seeking advice outside other industries and modeling what other people are doing. It's in my first business, Patient Authentic, where I'm working with pharma companies, biotech, health tech. I'm always talking about that and how we should be looking outside at other industries to see what they're doing, because healthcare is so like, I feel like there's the blinders on sometimes, and we don't like to think outside the box, and we're dealing with compliance and we're dealing with all of these things. But what if we just thought big and we're dreaming and scheming a little bit to think about how this could look if we weren't so refined to this box. So I love that advice. And I love the advice around community and mentors, having good people to lean on, even sometimes to just vent, people who understand what you are going through, and then to also learn from them and have them to guide you. So very sound advice. And thank you also for being so honest and transparent about everything that you're juggling right now. And that I think a lot of us, we share, we always talk about this. Social media is a highlight reel. We're sharing all the good that's happening and like, yeah, I'm getting new patients and my business is growing and we have followers and our podcast is thriving and all of those things. But also behind the scenes, oh my God, I'm trying to figure out the systems and I'm trying to hire people and I'm trying, right? There's just so much going on that we don't see. And then we end up in this comparison game of like, oh my God, that person really has it together. And I feel like my business is falling apart. And so I just appreciate the transparency, because if more of us can be vulnerable and can share like this, it helps us all breathe a sigh of relief. And it also helps us all like band together and take those steps and leaps forward. So thank you.
I think one thing I have committed to doing, and it sounds so silly, but I don't use actual filters ever on social media, just because like one, I just never got into it, but also it just didn't feel part of what I've tried to build as a brand is that you get me and I am human, and I am aging, and maybe my thoughts will change over time as the wrinkles add up and the glitter strands multiply. But I think that's really important. And frankly, when I think about the disconnect that's happened between patients and physicians, there, I think, is a need for a recognition on both sides that we are human. And I think that sometimes gets forgotten in the tribalism essentially,
Mhm.
kind of this like, oh, and I understand like there are, you know, goodness, vast majority of us in the chronic illness community have been mistreated by the medical system. Oftentimes, physicians have been a part of that. And also, I think it's important, one, not to excuse bad behavior, but to provide some context in that. And one of the core reasons I'm not in the system I was in any longer is that the systems ask us to practice in ways that are not at all aligned with what we anticipated when we essentially spent our entire 20s, for most of us, in a library or an anatomy lab or the hospital. It's not what we thought we were getting into when we signed up for the hundreds of thousands of dollars that we end up in debt at the end. And the reality is, when you have that much debt, you have to pay it off. And oftentimes we end up practicing in systems that aren't aligned with our values, frankly, because at that point we are having kids and mortgage and, and like wanting to live live as black and white as we sometimes would like to think it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for being so vulnerable again and sharing. And I also, just going back to what you said about trying to just show up as you on social media, right? And no filters, no, it's something that, again, another place where I get lost in comparison of, oh my God, they look so great. And I try to be transparent about, we do a lot of photo shoots, and I've done newsletters and social media posts on how much time, effort, money goes into me looking like that. I didn't wake up like this, right? I have a hairstylist and a makeup artist, and there's a stylist who's helping me get the outfits for the shoot, and there's Photoshop, and there's all of these things. Like, it's literally thousands of dollars and many, many hours to put together a photo shoot where you look like that.
Mhm.
And it can be really just, and when that's what we're served all day when we're scrolling, we're
Yeah.
these professional photo shoots, it can make us start to look inward and think, oh my God, like, look at her legs, look at her hair, look at this, look at that. And it's just, it's not reality, right? And so I think we all need to do a better job, myself included, of getting on there and reminding people like, hey, this was a photo shoot that was a lot of time, effort, money, and like, I don't look like this when I get out of bed.
And also, how much fun was it? And it really feels good to. The last few years, rediscovered my love of pageantry, and I've taken a couple years off, but like there is something really fun about sparkling for authenticity and to be unapologetic about wanting to look good and get dressed up and those.
Yes, I thank you for saying that and honoring that,
Yeah.
because it is fun, right? It is fun.
It's so fun.
Have her there. Yeah, it feels really good. Like, oh my God, I look good. They did a great job by hair and makeup, and it's fun. It's fun. But then also remembering, like, that's if you were to look at 365 days of the year, that's not how I look every day of the year, right? So it's just, but I appreciate you saying that. So, Kara, we have covered so many topics today. I've learned so much from you, just from the health perspective and thinking about how we can reclaim our health as patients. And also as a business owner, you've been so vulnerable and you've really shared some incredible lessons and tools and tactics for others to take forward. So thank you for that vulnerability and your brilliance. I, of course, have to end our episode by asking you, what does being a chronic boss mean to you?
Ooh, I think in my mind, chronic illness is something we live with day in and day out. And I think being a chronic boss is taking that day in and day out, but really leaning into the boss of like that rebel, right? Showing up, pushing boundaries, like not taking no as the final answer, and doing that with the same tenacity that these conditions have. Yeah.
I love it. It's a perfect way to end. Kara, thank you for giving us your time today, for sharing your wisdom. And where can people find you before we
Yes.
sign off?
So on Instagram, I'm probably most active at Immune Confident MD, and on YouTube, which is at Dr. Kara Wada, Wada. And then if you're interested in exploring care with our practice, our current website is drkarawada.com. Soon to come, we're going to have a institute specific website, but that'll be a few months down the road.
Amazing. Well, we will drop all of that in the show notes. We
Thank
will
you.
continue to cheer you on. Thank you, Kara, for being with us today.
Thanks so much, Lily. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap on this episode of Chronic Boss Unfiltered. But there are so many other ways we can stay connected. Head to chronicboss.com to access free resources, explore our membership, and join the community. You'll find all the links you need in the episode notes below. If this episode spoke to you, send it to a friend who gets it. Leave us a review or hit that follow button so you never miss a moment. Thank you for spending this time with us. Cheers to you, your health, and your wealth. See you next time.